Welcome to the Kauffman Conversations podcast series. We are privileged to talk with thought leaders, innovators, experts, and authors. Here, we take the opportunity to share our conversations.
The fundamental goal, objective of the exhibition is to provide visitors a sense of Earth's place in space, and a larger sense, a celebration rather, that we even have the ability to know it. That something the size of this has the ability to ask questions of the universe, and we can peel back the veil of nature and revel in seeing something new. And when you think about that for a moment, we're on this tiny, beautiful, tragically fragile little world where essentially 6 billion souls as microbes on the surface of this tiny world, and we look out into the majesty of the universe, and we have the ability to understand that we are part of a family of planets orbiting a star called the Sun, that the Sun is part of a vast family of stars bound together in a city of stars called the Milky Way galaxy. All of the stars in the night sky that grace the night sky are Milky Way stars. And our sun is just one of 300 billion suns in the Milky Way galaxy. That's enough stars to give 50 to every human being on Earth. And we think there are enough galaxies in the observable universe to give 50 galaxies to every person on Earth. And the portion of the universe that nature allows us to see is only, we think, a tiny insignificant sliver of the greater universe. So when you think about that, we have the ability to know that. And that is the stuff that inspires the next generation. And it fulfills a commitment to our own humanity because we are born to explore. We're born to ask questions. And what we're trying to do with this exhibition and related programming is to create an environment to inspire the next generation of scientists and engineers and provide an understanding of what science, the process of scientific discovery, is all about. So the exhibition itself, the problem with understanding our solar system is that the distances between the worlds are vast and the worlds themselves are very small. And so in a textbook, you get to see the planets on a page and the sun, and you get to see their relative sizes, but it leaves this mistaken impression for the reader that they're large worlds in a small space. And that's because there's no sense of putting the distances and the sizes on the same scale. And if you try to, and let's for argument's sake say Pluto is important. If you take a look at the distance from the Sun to Pluto, and you want to take that real distance and scale it down into a model that could fit inside, say, a large museum, well, if you put the Sun on one side of the museum and Pluto on the other, you've got a lot of planets, including the Earth, that you can't see because they're too small. And so you need to go outside of a textbook, outside of a museum, if you're truly going to make a scale model of the solar system. And so what we wanted to do was create one which is kind of interesting. If you build a model, a physical model, it's a representation of something real that could be much larger than ourselves. It could be much smaller, so the model of a cell nucleus or something like that. And we typically build a model about our size so that we can manipulate it. And so if you take a look at a globe of the Earth, well, you could build a globe of the Earth 5 stories high. It would still be a model, but it wouldn't be a good learning tool because we'd need the fire company to come over with a hook and ladder to take us to the top of the globe. So we build a globe about this size. The problem is that if we were to build, say, the Earth about this size, the model would span most of the continental United States. And if we build the distances, the distance between Sun and Pluto about this size, you can't see the worlds. So the best compromise is to recognize that there is a smallest thing you want to portray, which is about a moon 1,000 kilometers across, and there's a largest thing you want to portray, which is the distance between, say, the Sun to Pluto or the Sun to the dwarf planet Eris. And we create a model so that the human size is halfway between the smallest object portrayed and the largest distance portrayed. That's the best we can do. We're sort of midway between those two scales, or rather the extremes. And the scale that you come up with is a 1 to 10 billion scale model solar system, which is what's on the National Mall and which is what has just installed in Kansas City. Let me give you a sense of the experience so that you can kind of live through it yourself. When you shrink down the solar system to 1/10 billionth actual size, the sun is about the size of a pretty large grapefruit. And as you walk, and let me, by the way, put this in the context of Washington, D.C., so I can bring the United States in, the continental United States into this model. So imagine this grapefruit-sized sun next to the National Air and Space Museum, very close to the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And as you walk westward, you encounter the planets. And you encounter Mercury and Venus, and Earth is about 50 feet from the model sun. The Earth is smaller than the head of a pin. The entire orbit of the moon around the Earth fits comfortably in the palm of your hand, and that's the only place people have been so far. And so we're 6 billion souls on this pinhead. And that 50-foot distance between the sun and the Earth in reality is 93 million miles. And I don't know what that means. As an aside, in science education, we need to get away from asking students to memorize information that's meaningless. 93 million miles is something you can memorize, get an A on the exam, and no learning has taken place because you haven't built a bridge to the familiar. But here's a bridge to the familiar. If I could take a field trip to the sun, and I could do it at the speed of a commercial jet, which is about 600 miles an hour, that's 10 times faster than the speed limit on a highway. So you ask kids, is that fast? They say, yeah. Well, if I could take that field trip at 600 miles an hour to the sun, it would take me 17 years to get to the sun. 34 years round trip. To a 10-year-old, a fifth grader, they would be 44 years old by the time they got back. They would be an old person, according to them. And so to them, wow, the sun is far. Well, that's that 50-foot distance on this model. Every 50 feet in this model is 17 years at the speed of a commercial jet. And so sun, grapefruit-sized sun, 50 feet west of the sun, Earth smaller than the head of a pin, orbit of the Earth in the palm of your hand. You keep walking westward, you get to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. You get to the dwarf planet Pluto. You're 2,000 feet from the model sun. That's almost half a mile. And you look down at Pluto, and it's much smaller than the head of it. But you can barely see it and its moon Charon. And you look back almost half a mile to the home of the human race. Six football fields back to the human race. And you have to ask the question, how do we even know Pluto exists? Something this big has the ability to know that. And on this scale, the nearest star is on the California coast. So you could see the power of this, It's like the nearest star is on the California coast. Now in Kansas City, we figured that out because it's on the stanchion. You'd have to walk to, I believe, Anchorage, Alaska to get to the nearest star. And those are just 2 stars. And we said that in the Milky Way galaxy, there are enough stars to give 50 to every person on Earth. So the exhibition is about majesty. It provides, the visitor comes away with a few things. I can't believe how small Earth is. That's all we are? Yes. It's humbling. It's, we're built so that our eyes look horizontally. We don't normally go, what's that? And that's where most of the stuff is happening, And it's we get this sense. There's this old New Yorker cover. I'm from New York, and there's this New Yorker cover where a New Yorker's view of the world is Madison, Lexington, the Hudson, New Jersey, California, China, and up close you see the fire hydrants, the people walking their dogs, the cars, and then there's nothing in the rest of the world. And that's exactly how we are here on Earth. And it's important to leave home and look back to know home. It's important to be humbled. It's important to recognize that this world is a fragile place, that it's worth protecting. It's important, it's in fact more than important, it is a birthright of every student on this planet to at least be given the opportunity to understand Earth's place, our place in a greater space. And so there's a whole variety of emotions that come into play. In Kansas City, there's something added that's not on the National Mall. The Kauffman Foundation wanted to extend the path from 2,000 feet to a mile. And so the question is, well, what's out there? Well, one thing that's out there is Eris, which is the dwarf planet that was this object beyond Pluto that was found to be larger than Pluto. And the great debate was ignited again as to whether or not Pluto is a planet. And given that we were finding more of them, some bigger than Pluto, it was time to declare a new category of dwarf planets. And so Eris is in Kansas City beyond Pluto. And then I did a calculation just for the heck of it to see where the farthest object the human race has ever built is right now. It's the Voyager 1 spacecraft. It's en route to the stars. And it happens to be a mile away from your model sun in the Power and Light District. It's right in front of Union Station. And it represents the farthest object the human race has ever built. And it's located at its position in the scale model on opening day. And you walk from the sun, quickly go past the Earth, quickly get past Pluto, and then there's nothing until you get a mile down the street. And you're impressed with our capabilities from a technological vantage point to send a little robot emissary out that far. And then it says, there's a little imagine, a little powerful little thing to ponder on every storyboard. It says that the Voyager 1 spacecraft is traveling at about 40,000 miles an hour. That's fast enough to orbit the Earth once in 45 minutes. And at that incredible speed, it will take about 70,000 years to get to a nearby star. So models allow us to understand the world. And science education is not about memorization. It's about an emotional, conceptual, even guttural reaction to something new. I used to tell audiences that as soon as kids are capable of expressing themselves, speaking, they start asking questions. Every parent knows that. I had to change that because my son would look at a book and before he was capable of speaking, he would go, da. And you couldn't turn the page, he'd pull it back, he said, da. What he was saying is, what is this? He couldn't even say those words and he was saying, what is this? We are born to explore. And you're right, somehow we beat it out of our kids. And I think one of the problems is that if science is organized exploration. It's innate curiosity in an organized way. And it's not about a rigid process of the process of science as the way it's taught. That process is an art form. And we all practice that art form every day because we explore the world and we survive it and we learn and we put this new information about the world in our toolbox. And kids do that very effectively. But often science education at the elementary school level, and let me just say, I feel very strongly about this, it is important for science and technology to be something that kids become familiar with and comfortable with at the earliest grade levels. In fact, mathematics, the language of nature, is something they have to be familiar with early on. So elementary school is critical from the standpoint of this nurturing of exploration. And one of the problems that we face is that elementary school teachers are considered generalists. They teach everything. So the amount of background they have in science education is shallow, as is the case in all the other subjects. It's often the case that science education follows the path of least resistance, which is teach the book of knowledge, teach the facts, memorize this information. And often the book of knowledge is not translated into something that can be conceptually understood. It's sort of like teaching French. You're teaching folks French and you're not providing the translation. So memorize this French. I don't know what it means, but memorize it, you'll get an A. That's not what science is about. And what's also important to recognize is that even if you teach the book of knowledge so that you get an emotional reaction by building those bridges to the familiar. So I'll give you an example. Pluto has not completed a single orbit of the Earth since the Declaration of Independence was signed. Tiny little nugget with a connection point that itself can create so many questions in a classroom. Well, we not only, even if you teach the book of knowledge in a conceptually relevant way by bridging to the familiar, we do a terrible job of teaching the process of science, and that's far more important than the book of knowledge. A teacher once said, you know, I'm being asked to shove 5 gallons of water in a 1-gallon bucket, which is saying all of this knowledge and we're shoving it in here. And you can't put 5 gallons of water in a 1-gallon bucket. There's no way to teach the book of knowledge to any single individual. It's about teaching conceptual understanding and critical thinking so that they have the ability to empower themselves to ask a question and have the skill set, the artistry, to find a pathway to an answer. And those that do that on the great frontier, when they see something new, it's new to the entire human race. They take us all with them. And the feeling, that emotional satisfaction you get by pulling back the veil of nature and seeing something new is exactly the same experience that any child in any classroom on this planet should feel when they learn something wholly new to them. And the process has to be owned by them. And the way I like to tell teachers, I talk to lots of teachers, is that as a planetary scientist, my friends and I had to build an infrared superheterodyne spectrometer. And the instrument for the first time allowed us to measure gentle breezes on other planets, hundreds of millions of miles away, using ground-based telescopes. No divine hand came down and handed me the instructions on how to build an infrared heterodyne spectrometer. And soon as a teacher hands procedures for an experiment to a class, they've taken ownership in the exploration away from the children and have assured that science education is not going to be done today. And so there's a whole variety. I mean, you've hit a hot button with me. There are a whole variety of issues. And there are solutions for all of these issues, easy solutions. Every generation is inspired by the generation before. And it is a mandate of every generation to inspire the next. It's absolutely essential, because while the process of exploration is in our genetic code, the fact that we are born to explore, the knowledge base is not. And education through teachers and parents and clever storytellers and a good book at a library is the way that we pass those good works of previous generations on to the next. Every generation has to inspire the next. Right now, scientists and engineers need to be viewed as heroes to the next generation, so we can create the next generation of scientists and engineers to keep this country competitive in the 21st century. And we need to recognize that those scientists and engineers can't simply be on the frontier, aloof, far away, but they've got to get in front of kids and say, this is how I empower myself to ask a question of the world. This is how I empower myself to frame a pathway to an answer. This is what it's like to see something wholly new to the human race. And you know, I was once your age. And this is the path I took from where you are to where I am.